Order 38, a motion to adjourn the House is deemed to have been made and seconded at this time. Therefore, the question is that this House do now adjourn. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise this evening in adjournment proceedings to pursue a question I initially asked the Prime Minister on February 28th of this year. I was speaking to the question of, although the topic of the rubric, as announced earlier today, was climate, I really was asking about a series of related issues in terms of how Canada is prepared to respond to extreme weather events, such as extreme wildfires, the flooding, and the need to pursue quickly the clean electricity regulations promised by this government. Now, the Prime Minister's answer was certainly on point, but I'm grateful for a chance to pursue where it lacked being complete. Of course, it's no surprise that when reduced to less than a half a minute to respond to questions, none of the answers are particularly complete. But in talking about a net zero grid, to which the Prime Minister did commit again in this answer, everything the Prime Minister said in that answer are statements to which I agree. So this is not a confrontational raising of the issue in adjournment proceedings, but just the adequacy of what Canada is doing that I'd like to pursue tonight. Because as we increasingly see that one of the very best ways to respond to the climate crisis, to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, is to shift to electrifying as much as possible wherever we can, and to ensure that our source of electricity is 100% green and renewable. In that, we skip over a problem quite often, and that problem is, perhaps I can just quote from the Prime Minister's response on February 28th, where he said, quote, "A net zero grid will serve as the basis for climate actions across the economy." That's true. The difficulty is that we haven't really grasped a pretty sticky, unpleasant, thorny nettle, which is that we don't really have a national grid in this country. We have a balkanized series of individual monopolistic utilities, province by province, and just as we haven't yet solved interprovincial trade, we sure haven't solved having an effective grid. A grid system, I would point out, such as in the European Union, where, believe it or not, 27 separate nation states with the ability to have national sovereignty at their borders that you would think would mean they couldn't possibly do as good a job as Canada. We're one country, 10 provinces, 3 territories, 1 federal government. We should be wonderfully well organized. But we're a shambles. We don't even think like a country compared to what the European Union has done, where they have a fully integrated grid. They were able, after Putin invaded Ukraine, to say, Ukraine deserves its energy sources to be secure, so we're going to plug Ukraine into the EU grid. We can't plug the Maritimes into Hydro-Quebec. We've never had provinces at war with each other. France and Germany were at war with each other and better collaborate now than Alberta and BC. Somehow or other, we're going to have to figure out interprovincial federal cooperation around an electricity grid that works north-south and east-west, and only then can we meet the Prime Minister's goal and the government's goal and Canadians' dream of an electricity grid that works.
Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Energy and Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member from Saanich Gulf Island for the question and their years of advocacy on these issues. So let me be clear. Our government has no intention to delay or weaken the clean electricity regulations. On the contrary, these are the regulations of national significance. Yes, there's challenges with provinces across the country, but we understand the importance of getting it right so that they could pass the test of time moving forward. Canada will need more clean electricity to achieve a net zero economy. La population augmente.
The population is growing. More and more Canadians are driving electric vehicles and are using electric public transit. More and more property owners are installing electric heat pumps. Businesses are looking to decarbonize their warehouses, factories, and offices.
The grid will only be successful if provinces and utilities across the country can deliver significant emission reductions while continuing to provide Canadian industries, businesses, households with reliable and affordable electricity. And for that, the regulations must be flexible. That's why we conducted extensive consultation following publication of the draft clean electricity regulations last summer. We reached out to provincial and territorial governments and to Indigenous representation. We engaged with the Canada Electricity Advisory Council, with the utilities, industry, environmental organizations, and all interested Canadians. Nous avons entendu les
We've heard the concerns and criticism from the electricity sector and from governments. We've also heard about the challenges on the ground and the flexibility that we will need to offer some provinces, because in some provinces, producing electricity is largely dependent on fossil fuels. We've brought about improvements to give more flexibility to provincial operators.
Table, Mr. Speaker, with more than $40 billion in federal support to help provinces and territories on their path to a cleaner grid. Right now, Environment and Climate Change Canada is analyzing the feedback we received on the proposed changes. Stakeholders had until March 15th this year to submit their comments. Continued collaboration is crucial. As for all regulations, we will continue to engage to understand any remaining concerns before publishing the final regulations before the end of the year. And I know the honourable member has provided some feedback, and will continue to push our government to do more. We are working to make sure that the clean energy regulations make sense so that they deliver significant emission reductions, reliability, and affordability over the long term. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
I'm afraid that I have to express deep distress that the honourable member thinks that we are moving to clean electricity regulations. You can't have clean electricity when the federal government is allowing Ontario to bring more fossil fuels online to fuel an electricity grid that had been largely decarbonized by the previous Liberal government under Kathleen Wynne.
That's right.
It's a terrible shame when we want to move to clean electricity to allow more fossil fuels on the grid and to fail to move to ensure that the Atlantic Loop proceeds so that we can shut down coal in Nova Scotia, still its #1 source of electricity generation. The question really is to the government: are you serious about clean electricity and a functional north, south, east, west grid, or is it just a bumper sticker?
I just want to remind people, folks, to have their cell phones away from the microphones. I did hear a cell phone there. L'Honorable Secretary Parliament.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
The electricity system we are building across the country are very concrete. And they will be the backbone of Canada's net zero economy, allowing us to be more competitive. The United States recently released their finalized clean power rules on April 25th. Notre réseau électrique est déjà l'un des...
Our electricity grid is already one of the cleanest in the world. Around 84% of Canada's electricity is generated from non-emitting sources, such as hydroelectricity, nuclear, solar, and wind power. The regulations will help decarbonize the rest of our grid throughout Canada. This will be an important part of our overall contribution to reducing emissions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.